Imagine a 12-year-old boy sitting on the floor of an African school, wearing faded clothes and eyes full of curiosity. He doesn't have a computer or access to high-tech labs. His only tools are a notebook, a pencil, and a mind that seems to go beyond the limits of reality. No one could have imagined he would be the next to challenge the laws of science and make everyone question the very existence of God. At the center of this story is Kofi, a boy born in a small village in southern Africa, where poverty is part of daily life, but hope still lives in the streets. Kofi was always different. While his classmates played or studied for college entrance exams, he read books on physics, math, and philosophy, many of which he found at secondhand shops or borrowed from kind teachers. His eyes sparkled with ideas that seemed to come from another world. But Kofi also faced humiliation. In his town, science was seen as something distant, something for the rich. Adults laughed at him, calling him crazy kid. Even his own father, who worked in agriculture, said, "You need to be practical, Kofi. There's no place for dreams in our world." And every word felt like a knife in the boy's heart. Then came the challenge. A renowned atheist scientist, known for his radical views, published an article in an international magazine, claiming that the existence of God was just a myth created by humans to explain the unexplainable. But instead of just criticizing, he made a proposal. If someone can prove the existence of God with scientific evidence, I will kneel before it. No one dared. Until Kofi, not even knowing what he was getting into, decided to accept. At just 12 years old, he began developing an experiment that mixed quantum physics, biology, and even elements of spirituality. He had no resources, but he had courage, and over months he built a model that seemed impossible. When the experiment was conducted, the results were incredible. Data that contradicted everything science knew, and when the results were released, the world stopped. That 12-year-old boy, once mocked, was now the center of a debate that went beyond science. It reached right into the hearts of people. Where in the world are you hearing this story? Have you ever wondered if science can really explain everything? Kofi's story wasn't just about a boy who was once humiliated. It was about someone who, at just 12 years old, challenged the very laws of reason and belief. But what happened next? How did he manage to do something no one thought possible? The experiment was done in secret, in the home of a teacher who believed in him. Kofi used everyday materials, wires, batteries, even a broken TV antenna, to create a system that could measure something no one could explain. He called it the frequency of the spirit. And over weeks he collected data, made calculations, and started seeing patterns. But the world wasn't ready for this. The news leaked, first by accident, a short video recorded by a student who saw the experiment. Then an article in a local magazine. Soon after, a wave of global attention. Science, religion, atheists, believers, everyone started asking, what exactly did Kofi discover? It was hard to understand. The results seemed to contradict everything we knew about physics. There were hints that consciousness could influence subatomic particles. That energy existed at levels science hadn't yet understood. And worst of all, there was an order, a logic that felt intelligent. Reactions were mixed. Some scientists laughed, others were stunned. But what really shocked people was what Kofi said when he was interviewed for the first time. He didn't talk about miracles. He didn't talk about gods. He simply said, "I didn't prove God. I proved there's something bigger than science can explain." That's when the world stopped. Because even if they didn't understand, everyone felt something, a sense of discomfort, fascination, doubt. And Kofi, the 12-year-old boy, became the center of a debate that went beyond science. It was like he had opened a door no one knew was there. But the truth is, even with his success, Kofi wasn't happy. Fame scared him. People treated him like a hero, but all he wanted was to return to his village, to his soil, to the quiet of simple life. Yet the pressure grew. Science tried to analyze his data, Religious groups wanted to use his words, and some of the most radical atheists began attacking him. It was as if the world wanted to put him in a place he never asked for. And in the middle of it all, Kofi faced his biggest battle, keeping his own identity. He wasn't a prophet, he wasn't a sage. He was just a boy who loved science and the search for truth. Then came the turning point. During an international conference, Kofi was invited to present his findings. Everyone expected a tech show, a spectacle of engineering. But what he did was completely different. He didn't show charts or complex equations. He simply picked up a small device he had built from everyday materials and turned it on. And in the silence of the room, the device started to vibrate. Not because of electricity, not because of a motor, but because, according to Kofi, it was picking up something no one could see. Something that wasn't physical, but real. The room fell silent. Even the most skeptical looked at the boy with a new expression. Not anger, not laughter, but respect. And in that moment, Kofi realized he didn't need to prove anything else. He had already done what few had dared to do. He questioned the world, and for a moment, the world listened. What Kofi did that day wasn't just an act of courage, it was a turning point that changed the course of science, and more than that, the way the world saw reality. But how did he do it? How could a 12-year-old boy with no resources, no support, not even a proper lab, create something that defied everything humanity had ever known? The answer lay in what he called the frequency of the spirit. It wasn't a scientific term, it was a concept he developed on his own, based on observations, readings, and an instinct that felt almost supernatural. He believed that consciousness wasn't just a product of the brain, it was a force that could interact with the universe in ways we still didn't understand. But how could he prove it? Kofi didn't have access to expensive equipment. What he had was a sharp eye, a curious mind, and a determination few could imagine. He started collecting data, using whatever he could find around him. Wires, batteries, homemade sensors, even an old radio he managed to fix. Combining these materials, he built a device that, according to him, could measure the energy of the mind. The experiment was simple, but deep. He would put people in a room, ask them questions, and monitor the device's reactions. What he discovered was incredible. When people thought about something intensely, the device registered changes that couldn't be explained by known physical phenomena. It was as if the mind had a direct influence over matter, something science still didn't understand. Then came the most important moment. Kofi decided to test something no one expected. He wanted to see if the device could detect something he himself didn't fully understand. He sat in front of it, took a deep breath, and began thinking about something he had never shared with anyone. A question that had always lived inside him. Is there something bigger than me? The device vibrated. Not because of electricity, not because of a motor. It was something subtler, deeper, and in that moment, Kofi realized he wasn't alone. That he wasn't just trying to prove the existence of God. He was trying to understand something much greater. But science wasn't ready for this. Experts started analyzing his data, questioning his methods, saying he was mixing correlation with causation. Some even said it was all an illusion, a coincidence. But Kofi didn't let it shake him. He knew what he had found was real, even if no one was ready to accept it yet. And then, in the middle of all this controversy, came the question everyone was waiting for. What exactly did Kofi discover? The answer wasn't simple. It wasn't something that could be explained in words. It was a truth that went beyond physics, beyond religion, beyond anything the world had ever known. And maybe that's exactly what scared both the skeptics and the believers the most. Kofi didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to understand. But by doing so, he became a symbol of courage, of curiosity, of a search that everyone has, but few have the courage to follow. The world was in silence. Not because of the wind, not because of the noise of the streets. It was a silence that weighed on the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Kofi, the 12-year-old boy who had once been mocked, was now At the center of a storm no one could control. The data from the experiment was clear. It was unbelievable, contradictory, impossible. That device, built from wires and batteries, detected patterns that had no logical explanation. People thought, and the device responded. Not with words, not with digital signals, but with vibrations, with subtle changes in energy that he called the frequency of the spirit. Some scientists tried to replicate the experiment. Some said it was mysticism. Others said it was pure coincidence. But when the results started repeating, with different people in different labs, the confusion turned into something more dangerous. Fear. Because what Kofi had found wasn't just about consciousness. It was about connection, about something that went beyond the physical. And that scared people. Because if the mind could influence matter, what else might be true? Science had always believed everything had a cause and an effect. That reality was fixed, predictable, measurable. But Kofi showed something different. Something that didn't fit in any book. Something that seemed to say, there's more in heaven and earth than your philosophy can dream of. And so, the most intense debate in modern history began. The atheists joined forces to expose what they called a scientific fraud. The religious, on the other hand, saw in him a sign, a warning, maybe even a prophet. And Kofi, he just wanted to understand. But the pressure grew. The world wanted answers. And Kofi, despite his youth, knew some questions had no easy answers. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want to be a messiah. He just wanted people to stop looking at him with fear and start thinking. Then came the hardest moment. An international conference where Kofi was invited to present his findings. Everyone expected a tech show, complex calculations, impressive graphs, but what he did was completely different. He simply picked up the device and turned it on. No one knew what would happen. No one knew what he was going to say. And then, in a near-sacred silence, Kofi spoke. I didn't prove God. I proved there's something bigger than science can explain. And in that moment, everything changed. Some were moved, others were angry, but everyone, in some way, felt something. A discomfort, a curiosity, a doubt they had never had before. Kofi didn't know what came next. His life had changed. His future was still dark, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone, because even if no one understood, he had opened a door no one knew existed. What Kofi had done wasn't just an experiment. It was a revolution, and like every revolution, it brought fear, especially among those who believed science was the only truth. The most radical atheists, those who once laughed at the idea of God as something mystical or unproven, were now in shock, not because of the boy, but because of the results, because what he had found wasn't just unexplainable, it was inconvenient. It was as if reality itself had shifted, as if all of a sudden everything they believed was wrong, and that was terrifying. Some scientists started attacking him. They said it was a fraud, that the device had flaws, that the data was manipulated. Others tried to ignore it, but the world didn't want to ignore it. People were curious. They were questioning, and that was dangerous for those who lived on certainty. But Kofi didn't let it shake him. He knew what he had discovered was real, even if no one wanted to accept it, even if some tried to destroy it. He just wanted people to think, to see beyond what they'd been taught. But the pressure grew. The world was divided. Some called him a genius. Others called him crazy. And Kofi, the 12-year-old boy, stood right, in the middle of it all, unsure of where to go. Then came the hardest moment. A group of scientists, all atheists, called a meeting. They wanted to confront him. They wanted to prove he was wrong, that everything was just coincidence, that the device was a trick. Kofi went there, without fear, without arrogance, just with the same curiosity that had always guided him. And when he stepped into the center of the room, he did something no one expected. He picked up the device and turned it on. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at him, at the device, at what might happen next. And then, again, the same phenomenon. Vibrations, shifts in energy, something no one could explain. The leader of the group, a man with a serious face, said, "This is impossible. Our science doesn't allow this." But Kofi answered calmly, "And what if it is possible? What if science is wrong?" That's when the silence changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was doubt. And that doubt, small at first, began to grow. People who had never asked questions now had them. People who had believed everything now questioned it. Kofi didn't know what came next. His life had changed. His future was still uncertain. But he knew one thing. He wasn't alone, because even if no one understood, he had opened a door no one knew existed. The tension in the room was almost palpable. The eyes of the atheists, once filled with certainty, now sparkled with something new: doubt. Kofi, the 12-year-old boy who had once been mocked, sat before them, not as a challenge but as a question. He wasn't there to win. He was there to share something he believed to be true. And unlike what most expected, he didn't talk about science. He didn't talk about equations or theories. He talked about what he felt. "I don't know if God exists," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I know there's something bigger than me, something that made me think, made me ask questions, made me want to understand." The silence stretched. No one knew what to say. Even the most radical seemed to hesitate, because Kofi wasn't talking about religion. He was talking about curiosity, about searching, about courage. Then he told his story. He spoke about growing up in a poor village where no one believed in him, about being humiliated, rejected, called crazy, but how, despite it all, he never stopped questioning. How he believed truth wasn't just something you learned, it was something you lived. "I don't want to prove anything to you," he continued. "I just want you to think. Think about what they say, what you believe, and what might be hiding beneath what you already know." That's when the leader of the group, the man who had once seemed determined to destroy the experiment, lowered his head. Not out of defeat, but out of respect. Because for a moment, he felt something he couldn't explain, something he had never felt before. Kofi was no longer just a boy. He was a symbol of courage, of curiosity, of a search that everyone has, but few have the courage to follow. But Kofi's life wasn't over. The pressure still remained. The world wasn't ready to accept what he had found. And he knew that. He knew truth wasn't easy to accept. He knew some would always try to deny it. So he decided to do one last thing, something that would change everything. "If you want to see the truth, come with me. Let's discover what's beyond what we already know." And in that moment, something happened. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a physical phenomenon. It was simply a choice. Some left the room. Others stayed. And among them, some began to understand, starting with themselves. Kofi never became a prophet. He never became a hero. But he became something far rarer. A symbol of curiosity and courage. His experiment, built with wires, batteries, and a mind that seemed to stretch beyond human knowledge, didn't just change science, it changed the world. Not in a day, not in a week, but over the years as people from all corners of the planet began to reflect on what he had discovered. What did Kofi prove? In truth, he proved nothing. He simply showed that the search for truth is more important than the truth itself. And that was his greatest lesson. He taught that science isn't just numbers and equations. It's also the ability to question, to doubt, to seek answers even when they're uncomfortable. And he taught that faith isn't just blind belief. It's also the courage to believe in something greater than ourselves. For years, Kofi continued to study, to research, to share his ideas. He never stopped being who he was, a boy who saw the world through different eyes. And over time, he inspired generations of young people from all over the world to question, to dream, to seek the truth. Science, in turn, began to change. Not overnight, but gradually. Scientists who once denied any possibility of a connection between consciousness and matter started rethinking their views. Some even admitted that maybe there was something they still didn't understand, something that could be beyond physics. And then, the world stopped seeing Kofi as a challenge, stopped seeing him as a problem, began to see him as a call to reflection. But what truly marked the world was what he said in an interview years later. "I don't want you to follow me. I want you to think, to question, to seek the truth, even if it's not the one you expected." These words echoed in thousands of hearts, because they spoke directly to what we all feel, even if most of us have never said it: the need to understand, to search, to believe in something greater. Kofi showed that truth isn't static. It changes, it evolves, and sometimes we can only find it when we're willing to question everything we thought we knew. His story didn't end. It continues. Every person who hears his name, every child who reads about him, every scientist who pauses before dismissing a new idea, they are all part of it. And so the 12-year-old boy who was once mocked became a light that shines the path for those still searching, still doubting, still believing. If you're watching this right now, know that you can be that boy too. You can question, you can seek, and maybe you can change the world too. If you had the chance to prove something no one believed, would you be brave enough to try? And so the story of Kofi comes to an end. A boy who, with courage and curiosity, challenged the world and made everyone question what they thought they knew. His experiment wasn't just scientific. It was human. It was bold. And above all, it was real. He showed that truth isn't always in what we see, but in what we ask. That science can be more than numbers, and that faith can be more than blind belief. He reminded us that even in a world full of certainties, there's still room for doubt, for searching, and for hope. Now, it's your turn. What do you think of this story? Was it emotional, inspiring, or maybe it made you think about something you'd never considered before? Leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. What did you think about Kofi, about what he did, and about what he represents? If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss any of the next stories that will surprise, move, and make you reflect. Because, as Kofi taught us, the search for truth is the greatest path we can take. See you next time.